Hi, just before we begin this episode, I just want to clarify that we've had some connection issues. So we've been re-recording some parts, and thereafter we've been cropping parts. So if it may sound somewhat awkward, it's because of that. So yeah, stay tuned. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Course of the Discourse podcast. I'm your host Omar Fares, and in today's episode, we're focusing slightly differently than usual. That is the politics and the challenges concerning the situation in Lebanon, including the ongoing Israeli occupation and daily Israeli attacks on Lebanese soil, as well. We will also take some time to discuss the domestic Lebanese politics. Thus, I have a very special guest with me today, Karim Safieddine, who is a political organizer, he's a writer, and a PhD candidate on social movements in the Middle East. I first got to know about Karim during the initial months of the Gaza genocide, where I took part of in his thoughtful analysis about the dire situation in Palestine and his advocacy on Lebanese politics. Nevertheless, Karim has been very vocal in his criticism of Hezbollah and their actions, as well as calling for change in the specific discourse, in which he has faced much pushback by supporters of Hezbollah on social media and other groups in that so-called axis of resistance. And despite all pushback he gets, he keeps saying what he believes is right. So Karim, welcome, and how's everything with you? And did I do a fair description? Did I miss some detail here?
No, thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to engage in this conversation. No, I think that's a relatively fair description. Obviously, the politics in Lebanon is very complex. There are many contradictions. We live in a sectarian system in which many political forces are competing and in which secular, third way, progressive leftist groups are attempting to take part in that conversation and intervene in the political dialogue in a fashion that does not reproduce the very fascistic tendencies of sectarian militancy in the country. Um, but yeah, on a personal level, we are alive. I'm now in the States. I was in Beirut a few weeks ago, coming and going. Generally speaking, if talking about the personal, the immediate, the family, everyone is safe and sound despite, material losses. But we're one of the lucky ones amid the mass destruction that we're seeing for really many families on multiple levels.
Yeah, of course. I was also going to ask you about this, because I mean, like if we're talking broadly about the situation in Lebanon, from what I've seen, like your family has been directly impacted by this war. Could you like share some about it, some more broadly about it, the situation in your neighborhood, and how or if it has influenced your perspectives about the um, regional developments after October 7th, 2023?
Now, of course, we're used to both the maliciousness of Israeli bombardment and also the tokenization and exploitation that is pursued by people who look at Hezbollah in a way that I don't think is accurate or pursues a comprehensive description of, what the group actually aims for in the region and, its various considerations. So there's nothing very surprising about this war, right? There's nothing very surprising about the way it started and the different ways in which it impacted many people's lives. But of course, when you are personally impacted in a variety of ways, that is going to channel a very immediate and direct perspective, really, on how people that have been impacted by the occupation for the past few decades have actually approached politics. So let's say the question of normalization in Lebanon. I mean, there are people in Lebanon who call for normalization, who say that Lebanon is, you know, can't absorb all these wars. We really need a transition of peace, and that really allows us to grow economically and socially. Well, for many victims of the occupation, normalization without justice, without accountability, means very little to them. Right? It's a crime for many people. Similarly, how normalizing with the Syrian regime without any form of accountability for its victims in Lebanon sounded very bad for a big portion of Lebanese people. So I think people always have a thirst for justice and accountability, right? I think this is a constant in life. And when you're personally impacted, you really understand the need for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, if I would just bring my few cents on this question about normalization, I mean, like, I can just like understand any perspective here, because I can understand those who have been directly impacted by this war, who have been bombarded, and just like they just want to live. They don't want to be. They just want to find any way out of this war, regardless what will, like, what the political horizon will be, and they are thinking now very short-sighted. And I think one issue about the question about normalization, there is some ideal that Israel would suddenly care about your sovereignty and everything like that. But I don't really think. I mean, sovereignty for Israel is always what it defines. So, I mean, like just take Syria for example. Now, after the Syrian Assad's regime fell in December 2020, I think 2025. 20, oh my, time is going so quickly. I think 2024, right?
2024, yeah.
Okay, so now I'm getting some. Yeah, I think yeah. So time is going quite quickly. So I think many people have this short memory that when Assad's regime fell, Israel just invaded Syria. There wasn't any provocation, there weren't any attacks, and Israel already held the Golan Heights, which it illegally occupied in 1967. So it took further lands, it took opportunity when it saw its adversaries weak. And this is also something I think Hezbollah supporters will make the argument. If you normalize with Israel, maybe Israel will just like push forward their positions. They've taken lands now in Lebanon. Normalization will maybe change. Like, okay, if some small missile land on some Israeli target, it will move further inside Lebanon. Now you have normalized ties with Israel. Unnormalizing will lead to even worse consequences. Like Lebanon will lose its only leverage against Israel. You see, and I think like if one would talk about like the question about normalization, like in a broader uh, political context, because there has been an Arab initiative, I think since 2002, led by Saudi Arabia, that if Israel ends the occupation of Palestinian lands, Israel would receive full normalization and peace with all Arab Muslim countries. And if countries just like normalize with Israel, um, the Arab world loses their leverage, the Palestinian causes loses their leverage, and the Israeli occupation will continue on Palestinian lands, and the issue will still remain unsolved. Um, but I mean, like, I think this is just a very complex issue, because some people just want to live, and I am not going to blame anyone for just wanting to live. But then I think one is also willing, showing some form of willingness to throw the Palestinian cause under the bus, and whether that would be right or not, that's a question of debate. Um, I personally believe it's not right, but this is a quite complex issue, right?
It definitely is a complex issue on many strands because there is a categorical difference between, say, a peace deal or a truce and normalization, right? These are not the same thing, right? They don't represent the same thing. Normalization means having exchange embassies, economic and political exchange, which is very different than simply having an upgraded arms agreement that eventually leads to a sustained and permanent peace. So these aren't the same thing. And there is almost no debate in Lebanon that the question of Lebanon being part of a regional military front is over. Right? This is no longer a serious debate amongst the vast majority of Lebanese. But the question of normalization remains very contentious in Lebanon. Very, very contentious. Now, if Israel or Netanyahu makes an open proclamation and says, take the land, give us normalization, I don't know what the response would be. Like, I don't know what the majority response would look like or what the typical Lebanese person would say. I do know that this is a very polarizing debate today, but I do think Israel may go in that direction. But simultaneously, it's a bit weird for the Israeli military establishment to go in that direction very explicitly because its primary goal is disabling Hezbollah. That's the primary goal of the
Mm,
Israeli regime. And let's say it pursues that track and takes normalization and gives back the land. Well, Hezbollah could still operate in a Lebanon that is normalized. So that means the initial
mm,
Israeli goal would have been disabled. So for the
mm,
Israeli military elite, it's in a very precarious situation in terms of the goals it can achieve because it's not willing to absorb the necessary casualties and sacrifice to actually destroy Hezbollah, which actually requires a huge ground invasion and a huge operation. So throwing the normalization
mm,
card, in my view, is a way to threaten major divides in Lebanon on this topic. Because the more the Lebanese public opinion is divided over something related to Israel, that's increased leverage for Israel to really motivate further internal conversation around it. If you ask me on my
mm.
perspective, I think the normalization discussion is a trick, and there's a need to really refocus and recenter the priority, which is a peace, an armistice agreement, making sure that there is a permanent stop to wars in South Lebanon on a variety of levels, and achieving accountability and justice on the medium term. Um, Normalization today will induce civil conflict and it won't succeed. And I think it's demonstrated further from 1983 to today. There is no way for one to sustain a long-term normalization in Lebanon. It's not a police state. It can't be easily navigated, and it's going to backfire.
You know something what makes Lebanon, I mean, like, especially unique in this region is that Lebanese politics are heavily influenced by sectarianist thoughts, and this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone considering how like how you have so many different groups. You have Maronites, you have Orthodox Christians, you have Sunnis, Shias, all these kinds of groups in a very small country, and all of them are supposed, like, like, to coexist and live equally and everything like that. So I think like there is like a large segment in the in the Lebanese public, among some groups who have very strong sentiments against Hezbollah, to play some form of, like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and in the context here, Israel is, for some people in the Lebanese, fraction Lebanese politics. I mean, Israel is, at least, like, maybe somewhat lesser problematic than Hezbollah, or at least there is a kind of right wingers. I've seen many times some form of right winger Maronite Twitter accounts. They're consenting for Israel to bomb Shia majority villages in southern Lebanon because they feel very safe. They're in their manate, and they're in their neighborhoods where they feel very safe that Israeli strikes won't attack them, or in southern Lebanese, in southern Beirut's, in Beirut's southern suburbs, where there are also Shia majorities. So there is, like, some form of, like, dehumanization among Lebanese, where there are many who are very much. They don't see Shia Lebanese as similarly as human as others, and because, like, they made this idea that their majority may be Hezbollah, and that will just justify what Israel is doing to them. So there is this kind of, like, complexity. Of course, one shouldn't say all from one faction hold these kinds of ideas or so, but, like, there is a broad. It is quite broad. Even if one would say maybe it's 30%, maybe 20%, there are still pretty much, like, such ideas. You can find them among many people in the societies.
There is definitely a lot of fear mongering and hate mongering that targets the Shia population in Lebanon. This is a reality. But there's also the reality that it is an exchange hate, right? So it's not one group that is marginalized forever. There has been a historic and disproportionate marginalization of the Shia population in history, but today, reality is it's a far more complex political and sectarian landscape in the country. You have a working class that is cross-sectarian. You have poor Maronite regions the same way you have poor Shia regions. But the problem that the Israeli war has caused is that, of course, it has created an even further disproportionate marginalization that isn't connected directly to the older political or the political economy we had for the past 15 years. It has created a new reality. And we also take into account that spiritually, politically, culturally, there have been two national liberations in the country. You had the struggle against the Israeli occupation in South Lebanon that was primarily held by the Shia of the country. And you do have the struggle against the Syrian occupation and the Syrian mandate, which was primarily held by the Maronite elite and a very good portion of the Maronite population, in fact. Maybe I should have said Shia elite at first too, right? So, I mean, political elites are the people who are navigating this religious, political, social elites, intellectual elites. But of course, you also have a constituency and a social base under these different formulations. And year 2000 is South Lebanon's liberation from Israel. And year 2005 is Beirut's liberation from the Syrian mandate. And these two liberations exist. And in the first case, you did have forces that allied with the Israeli occupation. And in the second case, you do have forces that aligned with the Syrian occupation. The Lebanese forces, um, which is basically the largest and most formidable Maronite political group in the country, did have ties with Israel. And Hezbollah consolidated its alliance with the Syrian regime during its presence in Lebanon. So who was a traitor? I mean, everyone collaborated with external forces, and everyone resisted
Mm.
external forces. That's a reality. And I think
Yeah.
what's going on here is that you have this exchange with hate that is not only confessional, that is not only identitarian, it is historical, and it is related to the question of one's experience with an occupier, but different occupiers.
Mm. I think what you're saying here is very important, and of course, um, I think also like if I would also ask from my Palestinian perspective, PLO was also very present in Lebanon during the years of the civil war, and also during that time there were like Shias in the south. Some of them were also a bit welcoming. The Israeli troops and also Maronites during the same civil war, where I mean, like they were on the same side, but like it wasn't necessarily that they loved Israel, but that the PLO did terrible actions, which I have no problems in saying they have done mistakes during this war, and that has in one way or other made people use some form of like they have some preference mentality, they're thinking in the way of preferences. Maybe you have two bad options, but what option is lesser bad? This is maybe how people are like approaching, how people are approaching this current war in Lebanon. Those who support Hezbollah, they will be very hardline on the support for Hezbollah. They will call anyone who doesn't support it traitors. And on the other side, you have some or I would maybe say there are maybe three camps. I would say some more moderate. They're the ones who support the Lebanese government. The Lebanese government, unlike some popular belief, they don't really want to normalize with this. They just want to end this war. They just want silence on the frontiers. While there is maybe the most extreme camp, or like the extreme that want to really push for normalization, and they're very genuine in the normalization because they want to use such a normalization agreement to, I mean, like in one way or other, they think that will in some way solve the Palestinian issue, which it won't, because where are they going to deport the Palestinian refugees if they can't return to Palestine without a Palestinian state? And then you also have, they would say, okay, if we normalize with Israel, maybe Israel can help us get rid of Hezbollah. And I think that's a very naive point of view. I don't think the Lebanese army can fight Hezbollah alone. But I think also if they would fight Hezbollah with Israel, that would basically open the door for a civil war, another civil war. And I think this is something the Lebanese government is very aware about. And um, so I think Lebanon is a very difficult situation, if one would conclude by saying that.
It's definitely a difficult situation, and I do think we can currently exist in a paradox and in a situation that no one has the right answer to. There are people who have extreme solutions, final solutions. There are people who think Hezbollah should just take over South Lebanon and do whatever it wants. And there are people who think Israel and the Lebanese government have to go all in to erase it. And that what that usually means is a complete erasure of South Lebanon because Hezbollah is part and parcel of Lebanese society. I mean, we're not talking about an alien group here, right? It's part of the Lebanese social and cultural ecosystem. So in the midst of all these challenges, what to do? Well, from my perspective, I do think that this won't be resolved in the next few years. In the meantime, you do need to create a third way in the country that brings people from across sects for a political program that builds the state and makes it more viable so that any sectarian constituency, including that of Hezbollah, is actually convinced that there is an alternative that is promising that we can hold on to. And that requires a lot of political, economic, and social reform. And it requires boldness, right? It requires people in the middle. Well, I don't like to call them in the middle, but alternatives, people who espouse a secular, democratic, and humanist perspective for what the country can look like, and people who believe in taking the country's political economy and markets and state capacity and exports and technological prowess and all that and alleviate it and make it something, you know, that really can create and exploit new opportunities in the country. I think if
Mm,
we're able to pursue that direction, that idea of state building, that idea of uh, social empowerment from below, that idea of creating institutions that are able to compete with Israel and a variety of other regional governments that may be threatening the Lebanese landscape, that is also a priority. And starting
mm,
that roadmap from today is a priority. And if we're able to pursue this on the medium term, there are many opportunities we can unlock. If we're able to achieve a deal with the IMF that protects Lebanon's banking system against the zombie banks that diluted it, now there are many new things we can unlock. If we're able
mm,
to bring in new technologies that benefit Lebanon's working class and that
yeah,
brings in a more diverse portfolio for the Lebanese army, then there are many new opportunities we can bring in. But
of
the
course.
current situation doesn't allow for these opportunities. That's the primary problem. I think that's also a priority. And I agree that the short term is a deadlock. I agree it's a deadlock. And I think there are people who can take the risks. I'm personally not in a position to take that risk. So I think from our side, from grassroots organizers from below, maybe a
Mm.
more medium and long-term investment is something more profitable.
Just discussing the current situation, because what you are discussing is probably more long term. Like when you're building movement, you need to it doesn't happen. Rome wasn't built in one day, or what people usually say like that. And as long Lebanon is in a status of war, it will be very difficult to move the country towards a progressive point of view. It will be more hardline. There will be more hardliners on the different camps. You see, it will be very difficult to reconcile the various factions. Some factions want Hezbollah to totally be eradicated. Some others want maybe the other factions in, let's say, the Lebanese forces. And I would like also to just raise up a common argument, Hezbollah supporters usually make that the that Hezbollah are the resistance in Lebanon that's defending the country, while the Lebanese state isn't capable or even willing to protect the southern Lebanon. There is a narrative that the southerners are the abandoned, and also those in the Dahi, the southern suburbs of Beirut, who are seen, who often feel abandoned by the state. And if you don't support Hezbollah according to this narrative, you are a traitorous person. What do you tell these people when they say this, and what are the flaws in their arguments, in your opinion?
That's a powerful discussion. And I think the first way to do that is to first acknowledge that yes, Lebanon's poorest peripheries have always been marginalized by the Lebanese state. That includes Tripoli, that includes Akkar, and it includes major parts of South Lebanon. South Lebanon is a big region, of course. They're not all the same, right? There are centers that have a strong presence in the Lebanese political economy, and there are more marginalized centers. And it's also very true that South Lebanon was disproportionately marginalized in the past. Things have changed in different ways and not to the better, of course. It's just that Lebanon's sectarian political forces have arrived to a new deal after the civil war that allowed different Shia political forces to be part of the state, right? So the reality is that the Zama, the people who are in charge of the country, the people who came out of this war, have, I wouldn't say equally, but have distributed the spoils of the war and the spoils of the state across different factions in a way that seems satisfactory for many people. That includes Nabih Berri, Hezbollah's primary ally, and Hezbollah itself. But it is true that the Shia population in Lebanon has a working class that is marginalized, like many other working
Mm,
classes in the country. It's also true that the Lebanese state and ruling class does not offer much to the Lebanese population. But Hezbollah has been part of that ruling class for a long time. Hezbollah was a major, major, major decision maker, and in fact, the leading decision maker in Lebanon for the past 10 years or for the past 15 years. So the state capacity we have today is not the product of this government. This government just
mm,
came after a financial collapse and after a
mm,
huge, huge, huge series of dysfunctions which
mm,
took place in the past 10 years, in which Hezbollah was leading. So I agree the Lebanese ruling class is a paralyzed one, and Hezbollah is not separate from that. Hezbollah is part and parcel of it. And the presence of
mm,
an armed group in a sectarian sense will obviously weaken the state, will obviously weaken
mm.
its local entrenchment and capacity. That said,
Yeah.
today, do I blame anyone who holds the gun and tries to push back an Israeli invasion on an individual level? That's a complicated emotional question for me, who's part of this, a person who's part of this community. But do I suggest that Hezbollah's allegiance spiritually, religiously, and politically to Iran has made our struggle far harder because it has made decisions that came at the expense of our interests in October 8, 2023, when it unilaterally opened that front with the complete disregard to anyone else in the country? Yes, of course, I believe that's a catastrophe. It's a disaster. And we need to have a sober conversation about these not miscalculations, these supreme catastrophic and crisis-ridden mistakes that really took us in that direction.
Mm. I mean, when one is saying the state isn't capable of defending Lebanon, or saying the state isn't able to do anything, it inevitably takes us to the discussion about the functionality of the Lebanese state. So first of all, there are many veto players, but I think generally, if you ask the average Lebanese person, they will say, excluding maybe the Shia minority, they will say Hezbollah. They have been using their arms and their specific leverage. It's the only non-state group that has the right to hold arms according to the Taif agreement in the 90s, where Hezbollah were allowed to hold arms, and they've been using that leverage to, for instance, there was that Beirut explosion. I think it was in 2020. So there were ideas of trying to investigate, but Hezbollah have been stalling such investigations, and they don't want to be held accountable, or those who are associated with them to be held accountable. I think it's difficult to say that it's just something that that problems with the Lebanese state, with its functionality, began after October 8. I don't think anyone would say that, honestly. I think I've been in Lebanon, I have family there, and I know that there have been often issues concerning the electricity outages, and like there are very frequent ones. As someone who lives in Sweden, that's very, very unusual here. And then there is also the problem with the Lebanese pound, the lira. So many people I know Lebanon, they just use the dollar because they don't trust in their in their local currency, and that's also a huge issue for the economy in the country. So and above that, there is a corruption, and there is some form of elitism, but it's a very deep one. Not just talking about the national bank, the central bank. There is some form of the elites have all agreed. Um, the elites from the Lebanese civil war, many of them are seen as some form of veterans who are now taking high places in the Lebanese politics, and they do anything to stay in power. They want to concentrate power with them, and it's in their interest to keep the state dysfunctional, to make any challenges to the current status quo very difficult. And also we have Rafiq Hariri in, I think it was 2004 or 5, when he was assassinated when he wanted to challenge this. This is also one instance where there have been some attempts, but like it's not easy, because the dysfunctionalities are very, very deep in the state, and one could even make the argument that it was also somewhat doomed to fail even before the civil war. If one would talk about the demographic trends, there were some groups, they were all competing about who wants to have the power, and once the Maronites were in the majority, so the other Muslims wanted to have more power. They didn't want to be dominated by one group. There has been very much like that idea that one sect must have more power than the other, and one sect must have some certain amount of influence in the politics, because in politics that matters a lot. I think just like how you're going to challenge Hezbollah's hegemony is a difficult question, because it's not like the Syrian occupation, which you could resist militarily and they would return to be repelled to Syria at some point, on Israel occupation, where the Israelis maybe thought like until 2000 that it's too expensive to occupy Lebanese lands, or like maybe that's I mean, like my perspective on the Israel occupation of Lebanese lands until 2000 was that they just thought that they're winning more politically on framing themselves as the peaceniks. You see, we left Lebanon, we didn't demand anything. You see, like they had this kind of approach. But I think like when you're going to discuss or challenge Hezbollah's hegemony, you can't do it through arms, which make it even more difficult, because you can't expel Hezbollah militants, because they're from Lebanon, they're not from Syria, they're not Israeli. You see, so you need to find or work with some of the cracks within Hezbollah. You see, like there are many people who support Hezbollah because it offers solutions that the Lebanese military, for instance, can't provide the answer for, right? So I think Many people who support Hezbollah would have supported the Lebanese state if the Lebanese state were able to protect southern Lebanon and take a strong stance against Israel and their daily incursions of Lebanese territories.
One has to deal with Israel and the very contentious regional landscape we live in, how one wants to deal with the security of South Lebanese. And it also has talking points about its own narration on how this occupation took place, how this current invasion took place. And for it was inevitable, right? It has nothing to do with Hezbollah's choices, strategic positioning. It has nothing to do with Iran's considerations. It has all to do with Israel alone. It is the only actor with agency. No Lebanese parties have agency. We are just responding to this reality, and there is no hope but to keep fighting and see what happens afterwards. For the first part, it's important to counter this narrative. Of course, Israel is a predatory state. There are many predatory states in the region, right? The way we deal with these predatory states is that we don't invite a conflict by taking part of a wider alignment that is calling for this perpetual war to go on, right? So it's important to counter that narrative. That's the first step on the Lebanese state. It has to counter that narrative, but also not in a position that allows it to become apologetic to the Israeli invasion. Of course, I mean, there are people in Lebanon, there are forces in Lebanon that want to suggest that Israel is not predatory, that the way it behaves in the region is completely normal. And it's us who are abnormal only. But the reality is that it's a much more complex landscape. So the first part, we need to counter that narrative. The second part, the state needs to become larger than life. And I mean this, not spiritually, I mean this politically, I mean this in the entrepreneurial sense. Take Zelensky in Ukraine. Zelensky has not skipped one European capital, has not skipped one capital in North America, has even traveled across states to really champion the Ukrainian position, to get arms for the Ukrainian position, very boldly, very effectively, has created an international media campaign in support of Ukraine. The Palestinian Solidarity Movement has created widespread sympathy for the Palestinian cause. Not always in the best way, but generally speaking, there is a public opinion in favor of Palestine and Ukraine in the world today. That doesn't exist for Lebanon. Lebanon is a far marginal part of the story. Even Iran, because of its strength, capacity, size, influence, reality, state reality, economic reality, is a far bigger picture than Lebanon. The Lebanese state needs to have a proactive foreign policy. And that requires mobilizing the Lebanese diaspora and creating real support for the Lebanese cause, for creating real military and economic support for the Lebanese cause, making Lebanon part and parcel of the global public opinion. And that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work that has not taken place. And that's an alternative pathway. Because if you don't have that global support, you won't be able to leverage it to get more further military, financial, economic support. But then again, no one's a charity. No states are charities in the world. The Lebanese government needs to pursue an economic recovery plan and make the zombie banks pay the price. When that happens, it can unlock new opportunities.
By zombie
That
banks, what do you mean?
basically the banks that pretty much crashed the Lebanese economy and financial system, right? The bank owners that confiscated our deposits, that blocked a restructuring plan. If you don't hold these guys accountable in the international market, no one's going to invest in the country. If you don't focus on a restructuring plan that holds those bank shareholders accountable, why would anyone think that this is a country to invest in if it has a volatile financial system? So you can't build an army without an economy. You can't build an army without reform. And that's something not only to blame the Lebanese ruling class in the abstract. Hezbollah is part of that ruling class. So the alternative narrative is first, yes, Israel is a predatory state, but we have agency. And secondly, yes, we need global support, but it doesn't happen automatically. And yes, we need to leverage our tools internationally, but to do that, we need to build our economy. And to build our economy, we need the economy to recover. And for that to happen, we need to restructure our financial system.
Yeah,
That's
but I
the
mean, like
alternative roadmap.
just talking about how are you going to make the Lebanese state capable? Just talking about the concrete steps. How are you going to do that? If I just like would share how I think about it, like I think politicians, even in dysfunctional democracies or what one would call Lebanon, they're still in one way or other responsive to the popular demands in different ways. You can you can do protests, you can vote for alternative politicians. You can show. I think if you talk with the average Lebanese person, they would say the government sucks, but they would still like, maybe vote for a party in the government if they have a chance in the elections. And I think there it is some people maybe they hate the government, but they don't know what are the alternatives. They vote maybe what they think is least bad. Um, and then there is a need to when I would talk about zombies, I'm going to talk about the older generations. So I mean, like, you know, the Civil War veterans, I think they need to be phased out from the politics. You need to have younger people. You need to have people with fresher ideas about how to solve these very difficult issues. When you have more diversity in the decision-making process, will change the direction. Maybe instead of like concentrating the power among people who have long clinched into the power at the expense of the younger generations, at the expense of even considering the benefits or the best for what's best for the majority of the people. So I think like in this regard that would be very important, like to take these steps. I think I mean before this war and everything, like there were wide protests against the government in Lebanon, and there is a large there are such sentiments. You need to wake this up and uh, and make such movement possible. But then like the issue with Hezbollah also is that it's not responsive in the same way that the government is to the will of the majority. Hezbollah can have 10% of popularity, even if among its own constituency, but they will still have power. They will still have unproportional power. They will still have a veto position in Lebanese politics because they hold the arms. They can't be held accountable in the same way because they can always use their arms to push for their interest, to make political deadlocks possible, you know, all these things. So I think there is a very huge need among their own constituency to provide an alternative. Look, vote for this politician. He wants to reform. He also wants to push for the interest for our group. Maybe unifying. I think one issue is that they're just looking at Lebanese politics in general. It seems like each sect have their own have their own political party, and that may also add more complexities. You know, in other countries, you have a right-wing party, you have a left-wing party, you have a centrist party. You know, they're very different in their, but like Lebanese parties, by large, they're reflecting sect interests rather than like concrete politics. You see.
Yeah. I think there are several dimensions to this. Number one, there is something known as the Lebanese state, which is a structure of institutions that many political forces and many civil society faces, if we're going to use that term. I don't like using it because I like the Gramscian way of civil society, not the neoliberal understanding. But you have independent forces, right, from the sectarian system in the Lebanese state. You have institutions that are good in the Lebanese state. So that's the first thing. Then you have governments like cabinets right? So now we have a current government that received confidence from the parliament. And then you have the Lebanese ruling class, the post-war Lebanese ruling class. That's a third dimension. That's the deep state, right? That includes the warlords. That's the system. That's what we're talking about, really, right? And Hezbollah is in and out of that Lebanese ruling class. It's in of it, but at the same time, because it holds arms, it's an exception. And it has indefinite power because it can use those arms to cause what you call the veto or an obstructing democratic force, obstructing the democratic process in the country. I think I kind of agree with you on the need for new energies, but I kind of disagree a bit because if you look at youth in the country, they're not that great. And if you look at some of the people who engage in the civil war, they actually learned some of the lessons that the youth have not inherited. So the reality is that it's a bit more complex. I think we need a cross-sectarian, cross-generational political movement that is able to create new politicians, that is able to create new programs that aim for that secular humanist alternative. If you don't have something like that, then you won't have the lessons learned from the past, and you won't have the savviness and quickness of the youth. You need both. And the alternative to Hezbollah can not only come from the Shia sect, it has to come from a cross-sectarian political force that is ideological, that is able to put forth a reading of history and of future, and bring those people together and have a chunk of it from the Shia constituency to create a real social trust. And then you can compete. But you need a good political school. You need cultural and social centers in every vibrant city in the country, in every vibrant region in the country. You need audacity. You need to be confident and bold about what you're saying politically, because the sectarian warlords are very confident and bold to the extent of murder, to the extent that they will use blood to leverage their political position. So I think the theory of change, which is what you're asking about, how we
Yeah.
move from A to B, that is a process of power building that is very grand and expansive and cannot be limited to one politician or one individual or one government. We need a real war of position that starts from below, that brings together these sectors, that brings together these cultural schools, that brings together these different generations of militants and activists and organizers.
Mm. Of course. And could you also tell us more about the work you do outside of social media? You're a PhD candidate, and you also do a political organizing, right? Could you just share some of your work outside of social media?
So I consider myself primarily an organizer. And that started with university organizing with the secular clubs across different universities. The first secular club was created in 2008. I was pretty young back then. I wasn't in university. The other people have been holding this torch for a long time. Simply took that torch in 2016 up until my graduation from university in 2019. But we continue to be part of the Meta Network, which is a network that brings together these secular clubs, but also alumni that provide support so that the clubs can increase their capacity, influence, discursive communication, etc. In parallel, I'm also part of an alternative space called Beit Am, which has also been engaging in a lot of mutual aid efforts during the war, particularly. But it's also a cultural space that includes a variety of social, political, cultural, and development focused forces. Um, of course, during the revolution, these spaces, the clubs, or the people who kind of were on the back end of Beit Am, their influence expanded enormously because the uprising allowed for some level of cultural renaissance, if you like, in which people started to talk about politics in the country, not only from the perspective of sectarian competition, but from the perspective of ideological and political contention. It did not start in 2019. The country always had a segment of people who believed in those struggles, but it kind of alleviated that conversation further. Um, and in parallel, we've recently founded a new political movement called Masar. It's a progressive, secular, democratic movement that we began forming after the parliamentary elections of 2022 because we noticed that we faced a problem, right? You have many people that claim to be an alternative in the country, but in truth, if you don't have an organized alternative that is able to compete with the parties that were created in the 20th century, you're not going anywhere. So that has been a primary focus for us, in addition to a lot of diaspora mobilization for Lebanese and Arabs who want to take part of the struggle against Israel's occupation of South Lebanon. That's going to require a lot of pressure in the global north.
Mhm. That all sounds actually very interesting, and I think you've brought a lot of interesting insights now during this podcast episode, and something that I need to also tell the listeners that this episode have been now cropped, partially due to connection issues. So on this note, I would like to thank you very much for taking your time
Thank you so
to
much.
discuss the very complex issues in Lebanon, and considering all the current challenges, and what are the possible and the possible pathways out of this. And I also want to thank all the listeners for taking your time to listen to this. And yeah, um, yeah, let's end on this.
Thank you so much, Omar. I appreciate it. It's been a wonderful conversation.